Good evening, members of the public, councillors and officers. I'm Councillor David O'Marney, Chair of the Planning Applications Committee. We're not expecting a fire drill this evening, but if the alarm sounds, you'll be directed to the nearest and safest exit by members of the team. Can I just introduce members of the committee on my left and the officers relating to tonight's applications on my right. Do we have any apologies for absences?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies tonight from Councillors Sean Garrett, Dave Hoff and Jonathan Quinn, and we have substitutes Councillors Johnny Cope and Ying Tong Perrott.
Thank you. Members of the committee, are you happy for me to approve the minutes of the previous meeting? Okay. Before we proceed, do any members of the committee have any declarations of interest they need to state before we begin? You can also declare these for each individual application. And on everyone's behalf, I'd like to declare I've received correspondence and phone conversations from Black Onyx, the agent of 251159 FFU, which is Tinkins in Chobham. Has anybody else had that? Well, that's pretty unanimous. If you have any other declarations, if you could declare that now. Councillor Wheeler.
I chose not to speak to the agent, but I have had communication from residents within the village.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I attended the site visit for both applications, which took place yesterday, but I still have an open mind, of course.
Thank you very much. First up tonight, application 251159 FFU Tickners, 74 Chertsey Road, Chobham. Ms Turney, would you like to present the application?
Lovely, thank you, Chair. So the application relates to the demolition of the existing dwelling and the construction of 9 dwellings with associated access, boundary treatments and landscaping. The site sits on the southern edge of Chobham, partly within the settlement boundary and partly in the green belt. It lies behind number 76 and 94 Chertsey Road and is accessed via a private drive between numbers 72 and 76. The site currently contains 1 dwelling and an open field. The surrounding area is mainly residential with detached and semi-detached properties, with the open countryside immediately to the south of the site. The western portion of the site lies within the Chobham settlement boundary and the residential use is considered acceptable in principle. The eastern part of the site falls outside the settlement boundary and is within the designated green belt. So the purple line shows where the settlement boundary is. So here's a couple of photos of the site. So this is the access into the site. So the photo on the left is the point into the site and then the one on the right is further into the site. And then these are looking east from the western boundary of the site, so you can see the existing dwelling, and then on the right-hand side is the open field. And then these are looking west. These are from the western boundary, eastern boundary, looking west back towards across the site. So again, you can see the existing dwelling on the site. So the proposal results in 9 units of a mixture of 2, 3 and 4 bedroom units. The development would provide a total of 23 parking spaces with a minimum of 2 spaces per unit. Each dwelling would be provided with its own amenity area. So here's the proposed street scene of the units, showing a mixture of designs. And then just going through just so you get a feel for each of the plots. So this is plots 1 to 3. And these are plots 4 to 7, so plots 6 and 7 are a link detached. And then plots 8 and 9. And then there's just another picture of the site plan. So the existing drop curb and vehicle crossover arrangements would not be altered onto the highway. Within the site, the first section of the internal road is narrower and there would be priority signs given to those accessing the site. The access road widens as you move further into the site to allow for 2-way movement. The swept path was submitted with the application, confirms that both fire vehicles and refuge vehicles can enter the site, safely turn within the site and exit. In terms of the traffic impact, the increase is modest, around 6 additional trips during the morning peak and 5 in the evening peak. Parking provision fully meets the standards with at least 2 spaces per dwelling, electric vehicle charging facilities and appropriate areas for cycle storage and refuse storage. The proposal would also provide highway improvements for pedestrians along Chertsey Road, so these will include converting the existing traffic islands to an uncontrolled crossing, install a drop curb and tactile pavings at Brookleys Road, and install drop curb pavings at Delta Road. These can be secured through a planning condition. County Highways have reviewed the proposal and raised no objection subject to these conditions and highway improvements. The eastern part, so moving on to looking at the character, the eastern part of the site falls outside of the settlement boundary and therefore falls within the designation of the green belt. The application is considered to comply with the grey belt definition, and therefore the proposed development would satisfy the criteria of paragraph 155 of the NPPF and therefore not be an appropriate development within the green belt and is considered acceptable. Turning to the design and character, the site sits to the rear properties of Chertsey Road, meaning views of the development from the road itself would be limited. The height and overall form of the houses are comparable to the existing 2-storey properties nearby. The proposal is in a linear layout, and the spacing between the dwellings include soft landscaping, helping to maintain the sense of openness and ensuring the transition between the countryside and the settlement area. During the application process, amended plans were received to improve the architectural coherence. The resulting design now reads as a coherent group while still reflecting the mixed character of the surrounding area. Overall, the proposal is considered acceptable in terms of the scale, design, bulk and detailing. The residential amenity, the proposed dwellings will be sited between 25 and 40 metres behind the existing dwellings, exceeding the recommendation separation distance set out within the residential design guide. Therefore, the proposal would not result in an unacceptable level of overlooking, loss of light or appear overbearing. Concerns have been raised in regard to noise from the access road. While there would be an increase, it remains of a modest level of activity and it's not considered to likely cause significant noise disturbance. Overall, the proposal is not expected to result in unacceptable impacts to privacy, light, noise or general amenity for the existing residential units. The site is located within flood zone 1 and the proposed development was submitted with a drainage plan and is considered to comply with the drainage hierarchy and incorporating surface water management. The lead local flood authority have reviewed the proposal and raised no objection. The development is considered acceptable in principle and the design and character terms resulting in a scale and density of development appropriate in this location. Whilst it would be acceptable on amenity, highway, ecology and drainage grounds, subject to conditions in the legal agreement to secure the SAM contribution, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms Turney. We have a number of speakers on this application tonight. Can I ask Des Tisbury to come up? Good evening, Mr Tisbury. Thank you very much for taking your time to do this. Once you start speaking, you have 4 minutes. You can just press the light, press the button, the red light comes on the device in front of you. And Democratic Services will time you down. You start whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready. My name's Des Tisbury. I'm speaking on behalf of the families on Chertsey Road who will be directly affected by the proposal, some of whom are here tonight. This is not one site, it's 2, an existing dwelling within the settlement boundary and a separate open field beyond it, which remains greenbelt in the emerging local plan. At pre-application stage, a scheme for 5 homes on the existing plot was deemed too dense and unacceptable. Rather than reducing the impact, it's been increased to 9 homes and extended beyond the settlement boundary into open countryside. This is not policy compliance, it is escalation. The Chobham Village Green Boundaries Study 2022 identifies the greenfield part of the site as making a high contribution to openness and character. Land of this quality should not be developed. The officer's reclassification as performing weakly fails to distinguish between the two parts of the site and is not supported by the evidence. The proposal is presented as infilling. It clearly isn't. It's a new backland estate extending into open land, in a form the report itself describes as more typical of an urban setting. This is precisely the type of encroachment the Greenbelt is intended to prevent. No very special circumstances have been demonstrated. The officer relies on paragraph 155 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which requires all criteria to be met. However, criterion C is not satisfied. The report focuses on the site's sustainable location, but omits the equally critical requirement that safe and suitable access must be achieved for all users. The proposed access is fundamentally unsafe. It is a narrow, single-width track between existing homes with no pedestrian provision. All users, including children, pushchairs, those with mobility needs, will be forced to share space with vehicles. This is inherently unsafe and conflicts with both national policy and the Council's own transport objectives. It also fails to demonstrate compliance with the public sector equality duty. It is also a known turning area already used by 3 existing properties, and intensification will create conflict, congestion and risk. Traffic levels have been underestimated. Each dwelling will generate multiple daily movements, along with deliveries and service vehicles, all funneled through the constrained access. This is not a minor increase, it is a fundamental change in use. Flooding is a major concern. Local evidence shows existing drainage issues and high groundwater. The proposed mitigation does not demonstrate the flood risk to neighbouring properties will not increase. The impact on existing residents would be severe. The new houses would face directly into the rear gardens and windows at close range, resulting in a clear loss of privacy and amenity, compounded by continuous noise, lighting and increased pollution from vehicles directly adjacent to garden boundaries. Finally, the Chobham Neighbourhood Plan will go to referendum on the 7th of May, only weeks away. This will formally establish local views on land use, determining this application now in advance of that democratic process is premature and risks undermining its outcome. This is not a modest or policy compliant scheme. It represents overdevelopment, encroachment into Greenbelt and unacceptable harm to neighbouring residents. It also sets a dangerous precedent. For these reasons, we respectfully urge the committee to refuse the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Tidbury. Members, do you have any questions of the Speaker for points of clarification? Councillor Wheeler.
I've got my own. I was clicking on the left-hand side and I'm in splendid isolation on this side. Obviously, I know the area fairly well, being a neighbour across the fields at the other side. Could you tell me, please, about the impact with flooding on the existing properties that are there and how often the area becomes waterlogged? And from your experience, how waterlogged the space is behind your properties?
Yes, Councillor. Certainly within our back garden, I live in number 76, whenever there is heavy rain issues, our garden up to the patio, so it's probably about 2 metres from the house, is severely flooded. It does drain away, but it takes about 24 hours. Since this proposal has been in being, we've now seen photographs of some of the other gardens further out towards Oakland's farm, and my neighbours seem to suffer more than that. Numbers 90 and 92 do have major flooding issues in their gardens. And I think all the gardens right across the front of Chertsey Road do have issues with the water not draining away.
So just to follow up on that, from your experience, and obviously you can see the area behind your house, where the bungalow is and where the fields are, do they remain fairly waterlogged during this period, or are they fairly clear of water?
Well, one of the neighbours commissioned a drone, so drone footage was taken. I think that's probably been made available to the elected members, and that shows both Tickner's number 74 and the fields behind that do get flooded.
Councillor Cope.
Thank you. You mentioned in your remarks the use of the sort of access point as a turning zone, I think you said, or turning point. Is that just by the sort of 3 properties that share that area, or are you talking about people coming down the highway and using it to turn around and go back the other way?
Yeah, it's used by direct access by numbers 70, 72 and 74. But it is also, because just down the road there's a place called Willow Farm. There is an industrial area, and I don't know why, but the sat-nav often takes delivery drivers there. So they come outside number 76 to 74 and use that as a turning circle, or take the opportunity, if we're out the front, to ask us where Willow Farm is. So that happens probably 2 or 3 times a week, certainly to my knowledge.
Members, do you have any other questions, clarification? Mr Tidbury, can I just ask you a question related to the drainage? The plot itself and the field, which is now part of the site, do they have any drainage works on them at present?
Can you repeat the question?
The existing plot that has the house
Yes.
and the new extension, which is into the field, does that have any drainage works on it at the moment?
Not that I'm aware of. I think the issue with the drainage is all around that area, even to the front of houses 76, 78, there's a culvert. And again, pictures have been taken by local residents that show that when it rains, it does get flooded. So flooding is an issue all around that area.
Does that culvert get maintained? Would that be Surrey County, or who does that?
The culvert isn't maintained. We have to do that ourselves. The only thing that I would say is that they do come out. I think it's Surrey County Council do come out with the gully suckers to make sure the drainage in the road is clear, but the rest of it is really down to local residents to keep it clear.
And how often do the residents sort of chip in and get that dredged out?
The culvert outside our next door neighbour, so that's 78, because she's elderly, my wife and I do that for her, but probably once every 6 months, especially around the autumn time when it fills up with leaves.
Okay, lovely. No further questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
The next speaker tonight will be speaking on behalf of the agent and the applicant. I'd like to invite up Oliver Patrick from the Community Communications Partnership and Kevin Scott from Solve Planning. Good evening, gentlemen. I'm sure you're well versed in this. Device in front of you, press the button, red light comes on. Once you start, you have 4 minutes, and Democratic Services will time you down. You can start whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair and members. I am from the Community Communications Partnership. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this application, which is a modest redevelopment of an existing residential site, replacing 1 dwelling with 9 in a location already characterised by housing and close to local services. Let's be clear, this is not a large estate in open countryside. It is a small, carefully designed scheme with high environmental standards, including air source heat pumps, EV charging, improved pedestrian connections across Chertsey Road, and a drainage strategy described by the LLFA as exemplary. Members will have seen that part of the site lies within the settlement boundary and another part lies within the greenbelt. The officer report carefully assesses this and concludes that the land meets the definition of grey belt under national policy. Where land does not strongly contribute to greenbelt purposes, limited and well-considered development such as this one can be appropriate. That is the clear conclusion of your planning officer. In addition, the relevant technical consultees have raised no objections. That includes Surrey Wildlife Trust on ecology, as I said, the LLFA on drainage, and Surrey County Council Highways on access. These are the expert bodies responsible for those matters, and their support is an important part of the planning balance tonight. Members will also be aware of the ongoing need to deliver homes. Surrey Heath Borough Council has a 3.16-year supply of homes, which is well below the 5-year housing land supply target imposed on councils by the government. Supporting modest, sustainable sites like these can help ensure that growth is planned and proportionate, rather than forced onto less suitable locations just to meet government housing targets. Chair, members, this is a small-scale proposal in a sustainable location, supported by consultees and recommended for approval by your officers. We therefore respectfully ask you to support that recommendation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm just not going to add too much to that or take up too much of your time. I think it's just worth focusing on, once you establish that this is, well, part of the site is grey belt, part of it's within the settlement boundary, and I won't repeat the analysis, it's all there in the report. This becomes just quite a simple housing scheme for 9 units. And as the report sets out, it meets all the standards of Surrey Heath, the design guide, and the County Council's highway standards. We've worked with officers through the pre-application stage, which has been a very helpful, iterative process, and with County Council highways to get to that point. So we feel it's a scheme that doesn't create any harm. On top of that, you've then got the tilted balance, which I know members will be very familiar with, so again, I won't repeat that. So we feel those are the 3 elements that we would just point to as part of the discussion this evening, but perhaps more usefully, I can just answer any questions members might have. Thank you.
Thank you both. Members, do you have any questions of the speakers for points of clarification? Councillor Glowett.
Yes, I just wondered, you say you've got this exemplary, very good drainage scheme. Okay. Will you be dealing at all with the culvert that's been mentioned earlier? And because that obviously seems to cause a problem, so would part of your drainage scheme take that into account?
It does, but I think the key thing that differentiates this site from the existing houses is obviously we have the benefit of designing the drainage from scratch, whereas I suspect many of those properties wouldn't have heard, predate sustainable urban drainage by many years. So this works in a number of ways. The first thing is what we've been asked to work to are the new standards, the new national standards, and it's the first time a lot of us have worked to those. They're not actually yet in effect. So each time the bar is being raised higher and higher in terms of what you have to do. So this drainage system is, it's not a great word, but it's more holistic because you have to use all the elements of the site, the landscaping, the ecology. Instead of having your landscaping there, your ecology there, everything has to work together. So the first thing you do is you attenuate the flows so that the surface water isn't just hitting hard standings and rushing off into the culvert. So you retain the flows, and then you do that in a natural way rather than just relying on crating and tanking, which is the other way. So you use lots of different elements of the site to do that, and then you manage that runoff over time so you don't get those peak flows hitting the culvert, and so you manage it so you don't create flooding issues.
Members? Councillor Glowett?
I just wondered, so would you actually be helping do anything to this culvert? Or would it stay as it is and the residents having to dig it up themselves?
The drainage scheme, the detail of the drainage scheme, we've put an outline scheme in at the moment, and then there'll be conditions, you'll see there are conditions in the report requiring those details. So part of that will include ongoing maintenance of the whole system. So I can't say absolutely exactly what that will look like, but that making sure the system is fully maintained and operates for the lifetime of the development will be a requirement, and the detail that will be required to meet.
Councillor Wheeler?
Thank you, Chair. Could you tell me, please, what percentage of the area impacted by this development is previously developed land? Is currently developed, and what percentage is currently greenbelt?
I don't think we'd argue that it is previously developed land. Sorry, by previously developed land, do you mean the definition in the MPPF?
Okay, I'll rephrase it, sorry. What percentage is within the settlement boundary, and what percentage is currently greenbelt? Or just answer what percentage is currently greenbelt, that would satisfy.
Well, technically it's all greenbelt. Sorry, I'm not trying to be awkward, but it's, thank you. That one, you can see that obviously the village is washed over by Greenbelt at the
Yep.
moment anyway. So we have a settlement boundary. I'm looking at that and thinking 40, 60%, but that's by eye rather than a measurement. This application sort of falls to be considered under the two elements. You've got the first part of the site, obviously, which is in the settlement boundary, and then you've got the balance of the site, which is considered under the grey belt principles.
And could you just confirm for me, please, whether or not the entirety of this site is outside flood zones 2 and 3 within the village?
I believe that's the case of flood zone 1. I think that was confirmed in the officer report.
So flood zone 1 is the least likely to flood,
Yes.
but is still considered a risk?
There is no flood zone 1 is there isn't anything less likely to flood than flood zone 1.
I'm just obviously interested because from the residents' point of view, they have informed us that the area floods, and actually looking at the wider flood map, this is probably about the only area which isn't in the current flood zone map within Chobham. So literally when you get immediately past that, the whole of Chobham, we are referred to as the Chobham web footers for a reason. And therefore it's very, very prone to flooding. And obviously I do have concerns about additional built form, not from the flood mitigation that you have on your site, but from the impact on surrounding properties, which with a loss of a natural drainage system is impossible to 100% guard against.
But I think this improves the drainage of this area of land because it has to. That's the way the hierarchy works. You have to. What you've got is something that there is no particular drainage happening there at the moment. So everything that's put on there is being done in a designed way, which is assessing what the likely risks of flooding and surface water flooding
of the
are.
additional surface water flooding as
It
a
also
result of
takes
the
in-
additional
it
hardcore
takes
that
into
is going
account
in and the
yeah.
additional built form that is going into
Has
that
to take
area.
into account all of that,
Yes, it takes that into account, but I'll go to the officers for advice, but I'm assuming it doesn't necessarily have to mitigate against the lack or the loss of green space in that area, which is obviously a natural drainage form.
If I
okay,
may
thank you.
contribute to the discussion ever so slightly, Black Onyx worked very, very closely with the lead local flood authority, which, as you know, is Surrey County Council, to such a degree that the LLFA, statutory consultee, responded, and I've not seen these words very often, by saying in their consultation response that the scheme as designed was exemplary in the way that it will manage water. I think that if that could offer members some reassurance, I think that's worth noting. Thank you.
I just wondered whether the developers and agents would consider working with the lead local authority as part of this process to look at mitigation with the culverts, which are immediately forward of the development site and cross underneath your access onto the A319. And I wondered if that is something that you may informally wish to
we can certainly take that away.
considering.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, is that a yes, you will informally consider it?
Absolutely. We'll
I think
take that.
I
Well,
think-
I was going to add further.
Positive,
I
actually.
was just going to add further to say that, generally speaking, I know the officers who are more qualified than I to comment, but in my experience, I would say that planning applications aren't beholden on fixing pre-existing issues, and of course, new applications like this one, the bare minimum is to at least not exacerbate it. And I think, given the LLFA's responses, you would hope to be reassured that the LLFA believes this won't exacerbate the existing situation. But of course, the current situation is outside the scope of, I think, the determination this evening. But that's what officers, I think, perhaps to confirm or deny.
I get all of that. I'm asking a question of the developers from a goodwill gesture,
Yeah.
maybe something while they have people on site.
It's
It may
something
consider
we
looking
can
at it
look at
because I know that they're very
we'll have the guys
silted up.
working on the site, so I'm happy to take that away and
Thank
talk to
you.
the client about that.
Thank you. Members, Councillor Yung.
Yes, I'd like to check, one of the resident previously, yes, thanks. previously mentioned about the lack of privacy, or threats to. Threats a bit strong of a word, but yeah, but feeling the compromised in terms of privacy. How is that being addressed?
Yes, I think it's the way the scheme's laid out. Obviously you've got the Surrey Heath Design Guide, which sets out privacy standards. This exceeds those by some considerable distance. So the minimum is 20. We exceed all those privacy distances by some measure. We're in excess, I think, of pretty much all the standards in your design guide, both in terms of privacy distances, amenity space. All of those things are quite if generous is the right word to use, but it's certainly we're not butting up against any of the minimum standards. We're in excess of that for each property, with each existing property and each proposed property.
Members, do you have any other questions of the speakers? Thank you very much. Would you be able to stay where you are? The committee will be asking officers some questions, but it may be handy for you just to be there.
Of course.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I think the agent's representative said that, you know, if we assume that, if we take it as read that this is grey belt, then it's just a normal housing scheme. I think this application really hinges on whether or not we do think it's grey belt, and I'm really interested to sort of explore that conclusion, because if I look at I've moved away from it now, but one of the clauses I think is one of the purposes of the green belt is to stop the sprawl. And if you look at the back of this garden, I wasn't able to make the site visit, but just looking at the map, it looks like green and pleasant fields directly beyond it. So if this isn't eating away and sprawling an existing development, I don't know what is. So I think that's the crux of this. And then the other issue that I'm concerned about is the access way, but I'd need to sort of have discussions around that as well to see whether or not that's a valid planning reason to refuse. But the access does not look suitable, a single track access for potentially 25 cars going backwards and forwards. Anyway, so I'm not quite sure what my question is, other than could we maybe sort of give us some idea how you drew the conclusion that this is definitely grey belt?
Yeah, so in terms of the grey belt policy, so there's been some recent new appeal decisions about the urban sprawl, that it's between towns, so Chobham's a village and then its next neighbouring settlement will be a village, so for that reason the definition doesn't allow that. The sprawl was between towns, not villages. So that's where the change has come from, the supporting the supporting evidence that went with the local plan, that since that was carried out, there's been a change in policy, and therefore the site would now be considered under grey belt.
Just to add to that, if I could draw members to page 16, which actually explains the grey belt definition. And it explains 7.73 talks about Annex 2 of the NPPF, and it defines grey belt land as land in the green belt comprising previously developed land and or any other land in either case that does not strongly contribute. And the key words here are strong contribution. We then have to rely on the evidence base, which Melissa's just referred to, and the evidence base here says it doesn't have a strong contribution, and therefore, under that conclusion and under that assessment, it's therefore grey belt land.
Members, do we have any other questions? Councillor Wilson, Councillor Cope, Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. My question was on page 14, it's paragraph 7.4 about the Chobham neighbourhood plan, which is going to referendum on the 7th of May. So it says in that paragraph that it's given material consideration, even though it's not quite over the line just yet. So I just wanted to confirm, is there anything in this application which would conflict with anything in that Chobham neighbourhood plan? Thank you.
Any neighbourhood plan essentially has to accord with your adopted local plan in terms of the policies. It can obviously take some divergence, but the central theme of that neighbourhood plan has to comply with what our own adopted policies say. We are content that obviously this application complies with current NPPF, and obviously in terms of the policies within the Chobham neighbourhood plan, it would comply with the thrust of those policies as well.
Thank you. Just a supplementary question on that. So the plan won't be adopted officially until after the referendum, assuming it's voted for. So the report mentions SIL funding, community infrastructure levy funding, that the developer would pay to this council, and normally this council would give 15% of that to, if it was in a parish area, to the parish council. But if that area has a neighbourhood plan adopted, they would get 25%. So would it be possible, how's that going to work with when the plan gets adopted? Will Chobham Parish Council get 15% or 25%, assuming it's adopted?
My understanding is that it would be after the plan is made, assuming it goes through referendum, that it would be from that point that then applies. But as the neighbourhood plan is not currently made, it therefore doesn't apply because this application is being determined in advance of that. But we can make sure that the SIL regulations confirm that, but it's usually based on when the decision is made.
Maybe the parish council will use that SIL fund to sort the culvert out. Councillor Cope. Councillor Wheeler, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of points to make. It would appear to me that with this particular application, that the definition of grey belt is open to interpretation, because currently there is a home, one small low-level property that is within this, and the rest of it is green belt. We do still have washed over green belt, and the whole village is washed over green belt, and this backs onto green belt. So we then need to look as to whether or not this green belt provides a meaningful contribution to the village. It's a well-known site, it's a well-known view. My argument would be that it very much does contribute to that. And also in terms of the neighbourhood plan, the emerging neighbourhood plan for Chobham, point number 3 says the proposals for development of backland sites, including residential garden land, will not be supported where it would result in harm to the character and appearance of the local area. I would argue that this does conflict with that policy. Generally as well, within our built form, we look to have a similar street scene and a similar sense of density. As far as I'm aware, there are no properties in that area which are semi-detached or linked detached. They are all detached properties with immediate access back onto the main road. And I have to say I've got really huge concerns around the precedent, and I know before anybody says anything, every application needs to be considered on its own merit, but then we also need to be consistent with how we determine applications. And this is an infill backland site that is taking one small low-level property which doesn't impact the view out into those fields from the main road at all, and building in a small cul-de-sac, I suppose, isn't it, or a housing development in the green belt. I also, if I could just check whether or not we have received the reptile mitigation strategy. Are we actually in receipt of that? Because I appreciate that this development is only fit and ready to go if we've received the reptile mitigation strategy. And as I said, also, it's about density. So we are increasing the density in this area. Does conflict with the emerging Chobham neighbourhood plan. I'm afraid I don't agree with the classification of grey belt. It's one small property. It's not previously developed land. I think it contributes greatly to green belt. So those, should I be able to persuade the other members of the committee not to support this application, would be my primary reasons for refusing it. And in addition to that, I do appreciate that Surrey County Council is currently the lead authority for highways. I went to the site visit yesterday after everybody else. I went up to the property, I turned round, I attempted to come out. And I used the word attempted to come out. We can see there's a bend immediately beforehand. It's a 40-mile-an-hour zone there. It's not yet in the 30-mile-an-hour zone. The lorry, and bear in mind that that is the only road within Chobham that can take heavy goods vehicles, because Station Road, which is the other road through the village, and the High Street and Castle Grove Road are all weight restricted. So all of the HGV vehicles, and as we're aware, dear Netflix have got a whole load of new planning adjacent to the common. We've got a massive new housing estate there. That road takes all of that traffic. I disagree with Surrey County Council. I'm not sure if I can think of any new evidence that's come to light this evening which would enable us to disagree with them formally without risking the lead authority nonsense that we have from them. But I think we all know, and I'm sure that those that visited the site yesterday would not be happy with living on that site and coping with the conflict of those vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
I think it was just the question about the reptile. Where is it? Sorry, the reptile mitigation strategy. And if we haven't, can I suggest that we defer this application until it's received?
So the reptile mitigation is secured by a condition, so it's condition 22. So we haven't received it yet. Surrey Wildlife Trust are happy that that'll be a prior to commencement, so that no works will take place until the mitigation strategies come forward.
So I just thought it'd be helpful because to come back on a few points, 'cause there's been discussion around grey belt, there's been discussion around the Chobham Labour plan. So I think it's really important to highlight that, and the councillors will be aware, the situation with Greenbelt and how it's assessed is quite significantly changed since the MPP of 2024. So reference was made to an evidence base earlier, dated back to 2022, which is still very relevant to the local plan. But how that assesses Greenbelt is completely different to the test we now apply. So that context needs to be considered. And the term grey belt is not always helpful because it doesn't look what many would see that term looking like. So it's quite a strict assessment in terms of what grey belt is. And the officer view is that it does meet that test in national policy. And if I could just cover a few other points, sorry. In terms of the neighbourhood plan, it is a material planning consideration because of the stage it's at. And in one of the comments to one of the responses, it does note that the proposal broadly complies with those policies. That's obviously a subjective view. It depends on the consideration, but that still needs to be put in the context of the planning balance. So it may be a material consideration, but that does not necessarily equate to a reason for refusal. So that's just a really important point to make as well. And I won't come back on the highways point because we've had that discussion many times in this chamber.
If I could just check, just for clarity point of view, if I look at the image that we've got up there, one could argue that all of the fields that abut the Sangs at the back of Chobham, which makes it the place that it is, doesn't materially contribute to Greenbelt. It's open space, but you can't view it from the highways. So are we saying this evening in this planning committee that anything that can't be viewed from the highway is not considered to be Greenbelt anymore, that it's grey belt because it doesn't contribute substantially to Greenbelt?
That's one specific element, but there is a broader assessment in terms of the grey belt assessment. It's fair to say that what contributed 2 years ago and what contributes now is very different. We don't have a borough-wide evidence base at this stage. It's something that will be in development, which would help inform discussions such as these. But at the moment, it has to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, and the officer view here is that it meets the grey belt test. Oh, sorry.
Just also on the grey belt, so it has to comply with paragraph 155, the A, B and C. So that's one element, is making the assessment of how it contributes to the green belt. But also then we need to look at the housing need that we have. We have a substantial need for housing. We don't have a 5-year housing land supply, and the site is within a sustainable development. So you take all 3 points, the site we consider falls within the grey belt definition.
Councillor Wilson. Councillor Coe.
Thank you. Just on that grey belt definition, it mentions the PPG in paragraph 7.7.4, planning practice guidance that was issued after the 2024 NPPF, and I think one of the officers kindly sent it to me, and it does really clarify what is grey belt and what is not. Maybe the officers could just expand on what that PPG says, and it might make it clear for members. Thank you.
Yeah, the planning practice guidance, actually we were kind of forewarned as to what that was going to say because of the Land of Grove End appeal, whereby we were trying to argue about the village, that the green belt protection of the green of villages, but that was removed and said no, you can it's only assessing towns and not villages. And you'll all remember the Grove End appeal, and we've got another public inquiry at the moment where such an argument cannot be put forward, unfortunately, anymore. So I didn't explain it in the best possible way, but I think you're all aware of the Land of Grove End appeal.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Greenbelt doesn't provide protection for villages merging together effectively. It's only towns, and these are villages we're talking about. So the other question on Greybelt I wanted to ask was the other item, because we've had quite a few applications that have come through using Greybelt rules, and many of them have had to comply with the 3 golden rules on level of affordable housing, improvements to highways and publicly accessible green space. And this application doesn't, and could you just explain why that is? Thank you.
So the golden rules complies to major applications, so because the proposals for 9 units is not considered a major and therefore doesn't need to comply with the golden rules in this case.
Okay, so just to sum up then, this application complies with the grey belt rules as applies to it. So we have to look at the tilted balance. So we should only be rejecting it if it significantly and demonstrably, the harm significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefit. Is that how we should be looking at it?
Yeah, that's correct.
Councillor Cope.
Thank you. I will speak this time, although Councillor Wilson keeps saying what I'm going to say just before I say it. So just sort of setting out my thoughts on this. It feels to me like what we as a committee have got to decide is whether there is a sufficient argument to rebut the presumption in the NPPF in favour of housing development in this instance. I think we've heard on the grey belt, and I'm satisfied it meets the criteria. Whether I think it should meet the criteria or not is another matter, but it feels like it does. And therefore, we're looking at the character and the appearance on the area and the impact on residential amenity. Having visited the site yesterday, it does feel sufficiently set back that I'm not convinced there's a sufficient rebuttal there. We've heard about flood risk and drainage, and it does seem there are some concerns there, but given the officer's report and the stakeholder engagement, there doesn't seem to be a sufficient argument there to rebut the presumption. Similarly with biodiversity and ecology, and similarly with the Thames Basin. The one on paragraph 7.5 that I'm interested in exploring a little bit is the highway safety, because similar to Councillor Thompson, while I understand that Surrey Highways have said this is sufficient, having visited the site yesterday, it does feel a very difficult turning point. And I just wonder, has Surrey Highways given us any indication on how they came to that judgment, or if they just said they have no concerns, and that's what we rely on. So just we could explore that a little bit, what discussions have been had around that, because it did feel very tight when I turned out there yesterday.
So the applicant did engage early on with Highways on the access point, and that did form part of the reason why the number of units that have come forward on the site, as Highways did give them some advice that they would consider, as far as I'm aware, the 9 units is the sort of maximum they consider that access to be safe for. As well, as part of the Highways, they will have the signs so that the vehicles that come off Chertsey Road will be given access first to come into the site, and those within the site will then wait. Highways have said that the number of vehicle movements would be limited, and therefore the likelihood of cars meeting each other wouldn't be significant. It wouldn't often occur, and due to it's a cul-de-sac that the vehicles will be travelling at slow speeds, that they're satisfied that the access is sufficient.
Councillor White.
So, from what was said earlier, we need to wait until our villages join together and become towns before we can object to the loss of our green belt. Is that correct?
In terms of the green belt assessment and villages and towns, they have removed that village aspect. I think that's for us to draw our own conclusions from.
Councillor Wheeler, you get to have the last word on this debate.
Thank you. I was going to say there's one other thing, which is policy DM9 on residential amenity, which is an essential hurdle for backland plots. I believe this policy is being carried forward largely into the new one, which states the development is only acceptable if it respects the privacy and outlook of neighbours, and it specifically targets issues common to backland sites, such as overlooking and loss of privacy, overshadowing and overbearing built form, and an unneighbourly layout. This is a completely new area of development which doesn't respect the current built form of that road. And I will just remind fellow members of the committee that it is perfectly okay for us just occasionally to disagree with officers and officers' interpretation of the grey belt. The only previously developed bit of this land is that bungalow. The rest of it is green belt. So we come down as to whether or not this contributes to the green belt. My feeling is that it does, and unfortunately, therefore, I disagree with the officer on this occasion, which is not something that I like to do. And I think it has an impact on residential amenity. And that's putting to one side my concerns about flooding and my concerns about highway safety. But those are areas that I feel that we could defend if challenged. Thank you.
Sorry, I just have to come back on the previous developed land mentioned. It's really important to say that grey belt land can be greenfield land. That land at Grove End is completely greenfield, and it was identified as grey belt land. So I just had to make that clarification.
Thank you, Karen. The last question on the debate, Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you. I also attended the site visit yesterday and had a problem with the green belt issues, but having heard the discussion this evening, I think it would be very difficult to try and defend an argument based on green belt. I mean, I'm satisfied with the arguments which I've heard, for what that's worth. Like others, having been there, I do have a problem with the access, but Surrey County Council don't, and not for the first time. One has to agree to disagree, I suppose, is the way to put that. I do have a couple of problems, however, with this. And I want, could we just put up that slide, please? I'd like officers' comments on because, first of all, as we've heard, this is classic backland, edge of settlement development, which is generally not well received, let's put it that way. And it seems to me that self-evidently, from looking at that drawing, the proposal doesn't actually respect the existing established development pattern. And I'd like to hear officers' views on that, if I might, please. We often hear the word incongruous, and this does appear to be incongruous. So, as I say, if we could have some comment on that. It also seems to me to possibly harm the character and appearance of what might be described as a semi-rural location, maybe, maybe not. And again, I'd like to hear officers' views on that, because there is a certain sort of feel, as it were, to that part of the road, and I'm not sure that this development fits in with that character, if you like, and appearance of the area. So perhaps I could hear some comments on that, please.
In terms of the backland, so part of the site already, you could maybe say, is backland. There's an existing house that sits behind the houses that front Chertsey Road. You might typically assume backland is more, you might use the phrase like garden grabbing. This isn't taking any garden space from those dwellings fronting Chertsey Road. They're not needing to provide a new access. Again, backland can be typical that you might acquire another property where you then need to create a new access off that main road to create a road up to the new development. In this case here, from the street scene of Chertsey Road, there'd be limited impact, that the dwellings wouldn't be, there would be glimpses, say, limited views of them because of the existing arrangement and access. The layout of the scheme has been designed to reflect the spacing that's similar to the fronting Chertsey Road. There's sufficient spacing between each property to reflect that, the spacious nature of the area, and creates that transition from the edge of settlement onto the green belt, and therefore the officer's view is acceptable.
Could I come back? I'm not sure you dealt with the second point that I raised, but perhaps we could come back to that in a moment. But just as a comment on what you said, I mean, the existing house is typical of the area, apart from the fact that it appears to be somewhat dilapidated. Whereas the proposed dwellings do not appear, I mean, and it's very difficult to comment on this just by looking at a drawing, but they don't appear to be particularly compatible with the area at the moment. I also raised this character and appearance area issue, rather, and I don't know how you can respond to that, or whether you've got a view on that. Whether this fits in with the character and distinctiveness, if you like, if you can apply that word, to the properties which are there at the moment, and if it doesn't, does it matter?
So in terms of the architectural style, as officers we have worked directly with the applicant in the officer's view to improve the design of the dwellings. They've taken cues from the architectural style along Chertsey Road, but also it can have a separate character because it isn't seen from Chertsey Road. So as a whole, the development responds well to each dwelling. It creates a coherent appearance, but again, still taking the cues from Chertsey Road to reflect the character of the area.
Thank you.
Members, the officer's recommendation is to grant subject conditions and a legal agreement. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Cope. Councillor Glowett. Corporate Services, would you like to conduct the vote?
Thank you, Chair. So all those members who are for the officer's recommendation to grant, subject to conditions and a legal agreement, please raise your hands. Keep your hands raised and I'll say your name. When I say your name, put them down. So we've got Councillor Johnny Cope, Councillor Mary Glowett, Councillor Ying Tong Perrott, Councillor David O'Mahony, Councillor David Whitcroft, Councillor Richard Wilson. All those against? Councillor Kevin Thompson, Councillor Victoria Wheeler, Councillor Helen Whitcroft, Councillor Valerie White. Any abstentions? No abstentions.
The officer's recommendation has been agreed. We'll move on to our next application. Moving on to item number 5, application 25-1105, FFU, Gloucester Hall, Gloucester Gardens in Bagshot. Ms. Speed?
Thank you, Chair. So this application seeks permission to allow Gloucester Hall to operate more widely within Class E, D, E and G compared to the current lawful use which limits it to sports therapy and Pilates. Gloucester Hall is located at the end of Gloucester Gardens within the settlement area of Bagshot. To the north of the site here is a rifle range. Gloucester Hall was constructed originally to provide a place of worship. In 2018, permission was granted for use as sports therapy and Pilates, and this application seeks to widen that use. These photos show the context of the entrance site, so looking from Gloucester Gardens and then looking back. These photos show the relationship with the two closest neighbours. This street scene image shows the site in the context of Gloucester Gardens, just at the end here. As you can see, all properties have their own driveways, and while vehicles do park on Gloucester Gardens, because there are no parking restrictions, there remains space for vehicles to pass and turn around at the turning head. So this application seeks to change the use of the premises to allow a more flexible range of uses. This would allow the premises to operate more flexibly and optimise the use of the site, which is in accordance with the NPPF. On screen now is a summary of the uses within Class E. The uses sought under this application have been outlined in green. The current lawful use allows for a limited use of sports therapy and Pilates, which now fall within Class E, D and E. Permitting a wider range of uses would encompass indoor sport, recreation and fitness, medical and health services, and office and industrial use. The consent would be limited to Class E, D, E and G only and would not allow the full range of uses permitted under Class E. A parking plan has been submitted which shows there are 13 parking spaces within the application site, and 2 of these over here would be allocated for staff parking. This does not include the 6 spaces which the rifle range have use of, which are here on site. The management plan submitted confirms that classes are to be staggered with a maximum of 10 participants and 2 instructors, which on-site parking provision can accommodate. The more flexible use sought would not result in any significant overspill to Gloucester Gardens, with classes to be staggered to minimise any overspill. Cycle spaces would also be provided here, which lends itself to this use, and the site is within the settlement, which is a sustainable location. The parking provision is acceptable for the uses proposed, and the County Highways Authority have raised no objection. The application provides for a more flexible use of the site, and with the noise and management measures in place, this application provides greater control over the operation of the site. A management plan has been submitted which demonstrates how the uses could operate. Class sizes would be limited with a maximum of 6 classes per day, only 1 class at a time, and they would run on a pre-booked appointment-only model and be staggered to prevent overlap. Noise controls have also been proposed, including ensuring the doors are closed during classes and no outdoor classes. A condition will be imposed to regulate the maximum noise level at the nearest neighbours. This is a betterment compared to the current lawful use where only the hours of operation are controlled. There have been no objections from any statutory consultees. The proposal is acceptable in principle and parking capacity on site is sufficient. In addition, the noise control measures would prevent material harm to neighbour amenity, and there are no external changes proposed to the building which would result in any other harm. So the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Ms Speed. Before I put this out to the committee for a question, I'm aware this site is already under enforcement.
Yep, so they're currently operating unlawfully as a martial arts use.
So should we be minded to pass this, to grant this, the conditions that would come into play, would that be better for the local community?
So the martial arts use would obviously, the enforcement investigation would fall away because the use would be lawful, but they would have to comply with the conditions imposed, which at the moment there's no conditions to control noise, class sizes, anything like that. So essentially it would be a betterment than obviously the unlawful use, but the 2018 permission didn't provide any control over anything other than the hours of operation.
And will these new conditions add any additional leverage to any enforcement that's currently in place?
So I would say yes, because I know a lot of there's some complaints about the time they're arriving and things like that. Obviously, the use itself is currently unlawful, and then there's the addition of the new measures. They would have to comply with those, and if they don't, obviously further enforcement action could be taken.
Lovely, thank you. Members, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor White?
Unfortunately, it's not actually a question, but I called this in because I was contacted by local residents in Gloucester Gardens who are concerned about the noise that this, since it's changed over to the martial arts facility, the bad behaviour, the inconsiderate parking, the excessive opening hours, the traffic congestion, noise nuisance, and unadvertised classes. They don't advertise their times or anything. They're arriving at 5 o'clock in the morning. They're not leaving till 10 a.m. at night. The Rifle Club also has a problem with them not locking the gate because it's a rifle club and locking the gates is part of their insurance. And when residents actually try to contact the people at the martial arts, they are just faced with abuse. And the language with some of the, and I've actually experienced one person actually effing and buffing at a resident, which was completely unnecessary. And I don't know whether they were having a go at the resident or at myself because I was stood there watching. But there are real concerns that this is an antisocial place at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other members? Councillor Cope, Councillor Glowart.
Thank you, Chairman. Where I sort of struggle with this application a little bit is obviously, and I know we have to treat them all individually, but in 2018, quite a restrictive use was placed on this property with a justification that it was to prevent harm to residential amenity. It slightly feels like an application's come back in and now we're saying, oh, well, actually, we don't anymore think that a wider use class would prevent residential amenity. I'm not sure I know one way or the other on that, but it feels to me slightly inconsistent that we would take a different decision on that than our predecessors did 8 years ago, and that unless some guidance has changed or there's a reason why we'd change our mind on that.
Yes, so since 2018, the use class order changed in 2020, and previously this was under class D1. The purpose of the use class order changing was to be more permissive and allow some more flexibility with these types of units.
Yeah, I understand that, but this is restricted to much more restrictive than just use class D, old use class D1. This is a restriction to sports therapy clinic and Pilates classes. I think most of what they're asking for would have been under D1 anyway, maybe D2. But this is a very restrictive covenant that's less than just use class D1. So I'm not sure that quite justifies a change in approach.
Yeah, I think rightly or wrongly in 2018, when that condition was imposed, it was imposed just on that particular use. But in hindsight, that really wasn't a reasonable condition to impose because it was so restrictive on that particular use. But in practice, it should have looked at it in a more wider sense. And actually, planning policy guidance would not suggest that such a restrictive condition is appropriate. So as much as anything, I guess we're righting the wrongs from that condition which was imposed in the past. Looking at the old officer's report in 2018, it didn't actually expand on why this particular use only would be acceptable and not wider uses within D1, which is why within this particular report we've made a distinction between ones which we think wouldn't harm residential amenity, but if you had, for example, a wider supermarket there, the issues could be much greater in terms of the harm. So I think being consistent with current guidance, we feel that this is the correct approach to take.
Just one more, and I think you've sort of answered this, but can I just confirm that in your view, you wouldn't see a restriction this narrow on many planning applications unless it was a very sort of sui generis use? Is that a fair assessment of what you're saying?
Absolutely, yes.
Councillor Lowett?
Yep, I just wondered, is it still going to be run by the same people as do the martial arts, or don't we know?
We don't know, but that's not a material consideration in any case.
Thank you.
Councillor Wheeler?
Thank you. I feel so sorry for our enforcement officers. So we're looking to approve and condition this. A simple Google look sees that some of the people that are in the moment are operating classes from 6 a.m. in the morning, and others are advertising classes up until 9 o'clock at night. And in fact, who is in there seems to change. So there's obviously a number of companies that are operating from within there. So much as I appreciate that the previous one was too restrictive, and actually it's one I don't remember at all. Which surprises me with my elephant-like memory. I suppose it's looking for assurance so that having these operating hours, once that is conditioned, that we have the manpower and the will to actually enforce it, or whether in 3 months' time they will be coming back for a non-material amendment to slightly extend their operating hours. So that's question number 2. Question number 3, as much as I'm a great advocate for electric charging points, driving an electric car and not having a charging point at home, I am concerned with that may well encourage traffic down there just because there's very little in the way of public charging in Bagshot at the moment. And is there anything at all that we can reasonably do to, and I'm mindful of this given the carbuncle that we had at a garden centre just down the road in Bagshot, is there anything we can do about ensuring that gates have to be locked at a certain time or gates must be closed from a certain time to ensure that that site doesn't become a gathering point? i.e. can we strengthen that condition so that the premises and car park must be vacated by 9:30 p.m, for example? Thank you.
In terms of the first question regarding manpower, clearly, you know the enforcement service. We would obviously react to this if we had a lot of complaints, there was serious breaches of these conditions, we would take action accordingly, like any enforcement inquiry. And if need be, we'd serve a breach condition notice and take formal action. Then in terms of the variation to the hours in the future, well, we can't prevent that happening. If they wanted to submit an application for variation, we would have to consider that at the time. But again, we'd have to consider that on its merits at a particular point in time. But actually extending the hours of operation here, given the fact that it's a residential street, it would be very difficult for us to go down that route, given potential concerns and harm. but obviously we'd have to go through the due process. Then in terms of the electrical charging, well, in reality, that's only really going to be utilised by the people who utilise this site. That's obviously a highways requirement. We have to meet the highways requirements in that respect. And then finally, in terms of the gates, we can't really have control over that because, bearing in mind the rifle club that is there as well, what we can do is put an informative down to advise the applicants of the issues in respect to that. But obviously the management plan will provide them with greater control as to how the premises operate generally, and I hope that will remove some of the concerns and issues there are at the moment.
Members, do we have any further questions? Councillor White?
Can we condition the time that they open and close and make it reasonable to the residents?
Yeah, there is a condition limiting the hours of operation of the premises from 7 to 9 in the week, 8 till 6 on Saturdays. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. 8 till 4 on Saturdays and 10 till 3 on Sundays and bank holidays.
Can we actually make it later than 7 during the week? Can it be 8 o'clock?
Sorry, it's 8 o'clock on weekdays, yeah. So that's an hour later than the current hours of operation.
Members, if you have no further questions, the officer's recommendation is to grant subject to conditions and an informative. Have a proposer and a seconder, please. Councillor Whitcroft, Councillor Whitcroft. That's easy. Democratic Services like to take the vote.
Thank you, Chair. So all those for, please raise your hand. Keep them up. So when I say your name, take them down. So we've got Councillor Johnny Cope, Councillor Mary Glowett, Councillor Ying Tong Perrott, Councillor David O'Mahony, Councillor Kevin Thompson, Councillor Victoria Wheeler, Councillor David Whitcroft, Councillor Helen Whitcroft, and Councillor Richard Wilson. All those against? Councillor Valerie White. And any abstentions? No abstentions.
Application 251105 FSU has been granted. I'd just like you to come together and to congratulate Officer Miss Melissa Turney, who is getting married this Saturday to Rob Casey. So you'll be Mrs. Casey or Mrs. Double Barrelling?
No, just Casey.
Just Casey. Which is next Friday on the 27th. And wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this evening's entertainment. I look forward to seeing you on the next pack. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.